to problem, and then okay, we'll dive into it. Okay, great. So
So tell me, Hunter, what's the problem?
hello. Creating videos without introductions is a problem. My name is Hunter Willis. This is Jay Leask, and this is Buzzkill, my On the Spot podcast. Now, great. Thanks for joining us today. We got a great episode on communication, which is what I'm trying to do right now. Okay, great. So there's our intro.
Nice and ironic that in an episode about communication, I just hit record and didn't tell you.
Exactly. No, this is great though. So what we're talking about is communication, right? And it's because this is often a sore point for IT and organizations, right? And like, there's all sorts of different people in IT. Some of them are really good at communication, but there is kind of an industry reputation across the board, I would say, that there are communication problems between IT departments and users using like software and different technology tools. And I think that, probably 10 or 15 years ago, we would have said, well, the IT stereotype is the person in the basement but that's not really true anymore, right? We wouldn't even necessarily think, especially in our industry and the people that we interact with, I don't think of IT people as like introverts anymore. I just think it's that, it's really just people coming from different perspectives, right? Would you agree with that statement, Jay?
Can you hear me? Did my microphone die? It did.
Your microphone totally died.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Just as I went to talk too.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So before my microphone died, where were we?
Yeah, so I said that, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of people would have said, IT people are like, introverts stuck in the basement and stuff. But I really feel like there's a much broader kind of person that is an IT or technologist now. And I don't really feel like that's true at all. And maybe never was, right? But no, I think it's.
Yeah. It's not that I disagree with you, but I'm going to talk over you.
Yeah.
It's not that I disagree with you. I think that is a stereotype is not inaccurate, but it's also not literally everybody. And there are a lot more people. There are women in tech. There are minorities in tech. It's not the same problem it used to be. The problem, though, is that not everybody in technology understands how to explain this is my technology and this is how it benefits you. And they don't know how to explain we're rolling out the technology and these are the changes. This is how it's going to change what you do. In fact, one of the key topics that we have listed in our show notes here is vernacular and vocabulary. If I'm going to tell you something's going to happen, well, what does that mean? I'm going to roll out a new collaboration platform. Ding, first red flag. What's a collaboration platform to you? I'm going to roll out a new communications platform. Okay, hold on. What does that mean? Am I getting a new cell phone? Am I getting a voice over IP phone? Are people going to be able to call me on that number by dialing a 10-digit number? Or is it just for computer to computer conversation? So I don't think you're wrong that the nerd in the basement stereotype, I say looking at a nerd in a basement, is wrong. Just that's not the problem we have. The problem we have now is you have to think like the end user. And I like what you said in here. It's think about the message you're giving them and how are they going to take it? Get yourself out of, what you're saying. Don't think like that. Think this person's going to hear I'm getting a new communications platform. What does that mean?
And that's kind of an issue of context, right? It's like the person using the tool needs to understand what's going on, what instructions you're trying to give them. And this, for one of the examples I have of this, is that someone that's in my family came up to me and said, listen, we use dynamic CRM. And they just gave us a whole catalog of information about how to use dynamic CRM and, how to interact with it and where information lives and these kinds of things. But he didn't understand a word of it because it was all out of the box information and written in ITEs, right? In technical lingo. And it didn't apply to him or his job. And he didn't, they're using the solution now, but he, from an IT standpoint, the checkbox is checked. There's informational materials and instructional guides. Okay, that's great. But he didn't even understand like what the words were referencing or how to use it, right? And he's not a dumb guy. Like he's a really smart guy that was telling me this. So
Good thing to say about your father-in-law. I'm sure he'll appreciate that.
Right, exactly. So,
Not
right,
No, but you're right. It doesn't matter if you document the heck out of something if you don't say it in a way that's going to make sense to the people reading it.
right, exactly. So, yeah, a nod and confirmation. Right, exactly. No, so but it also, there's another aspect to this again, and it's you've got to use like we've touched on context. You also have to use vernacular, but you have to understand your audience, right? Vernacular to you may not mean vernacular to your users, right? What kind of an informal voice can you use, right? But at the same time, get a message across that's not really cold and stiff, right? So I think that this is one of the top suggestions I've heard to help kind of liaise these messages between IT and end users is tapping into the marketing department or trying to use at least a small amount of marketing resources to do this, because those are the people that are in charge of communication. They understand these things. They understand context, nuance, user voice and things like this. So it's important that, you have someone that can at least answer some questions that you have about that. Or if you don't have that kind of a resource, something that you can do is just go out and like read websites from large organizations that are, explaining things. And even, if you've got a solution and you're trying to explain it to your users, if you can find some, explained explanations and get that into your documentation without plagiarizing it, then by all means, go ahead and do that. There's also, for some solutions, there are third parties and like consultants that have built training guides for that. Like a really great example off the top of my head for Office 365 is Matt Wade has like a whole instructional website with a bunch of information that is written for end users to consume, that explains things in really simple ways for everybody to understand so that they can see what's going on and really connect the dots on their own about, hey, what is this? How can it be used, etc. Right?
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. It's interesting. So I've been in IT for 25 or so years now. And around 15 years ago, we really started to hear the message, do more with less. And when that happened, IT departments really narrowed down the number of people who weren't pure technologists. So the business analysts, the IT communications person, the enterprise architects, the strategic leads. These people started to either lose their jobs or switch to different departments. And IT had to stop supporting those kinds of roles. And what we're seeing now is kind of a renaissance in those soft skill roles. If you go to a SharePoint Saturday or a technology conference like Ignite for Microsoft, a lot of there's at least one track of conversations on soft skills, on communications, on understanding and defining value. And if you're not starting to see, if you're not seeing that in your organization, you're missing a major piece of the communications. Like you said, I defer to the man in the yellow microphone.
Yeah, no, just had aha moment, right? Really great example. When you go to a big tech conference of any kind, in our world, like that's Microsoft Ignite, but there are other, Salesforce has a huge conference. So does, Google. They have several events now. Then they're building those things like this. When you listen to a speaker, right? What do you want to hear? You don't want to hear, okay, so this is the PowerShell script, and here I've displayed it. You can see the references here, right? And these are the objects that they attach to. Now, and you don't want to hear that. What you want to hear is, hey, guys, what's going on? All right, we're having a great time. Did you know you can do this and that and this and that? Here's my link to documentation that explains everything, right?
And here's what you're going to accomplish. Here's the value you're going to get. Absolutely.
Right? So think of the best presentation speakers and have your training materials mimic that tone of voice. That's a really great approach to that. So we also cover, and what Jay just said is really important. So there's kind of this two-pronged aspect that I want to touch on next, right? And that is, number one, make them understand what's in it for them, which is what Jay just touched on, right? Explain what benefit they're going to be getting from obeying your rules, or why should you learn this new software, right? What does this do, right? If you're
Right.
doing X, Y, and Z job, and the more specific you can get down to the end user roles, the better it is for them to understand, like, hey, this can really benefit you. The other side to that too, though, is the more that you explain that benefit and explain what they need to do in their terms, the less they have to think. Because if you use really general and vague descriptions for what they need to do, and your instructions kind of make assumptions that they either know how to do something or know the next step, right? Then that leaves, and this is true for all communication, that leaves interpretation for them to try to figure it out on their own or do what they think is best, right?
So what you're saying is you want to balance the amount of detail you give them, because you don't want to overflow them with detail. You want to
No.
balance the amount of detail you give them with ensuring there is a clear and concise value that they're going to get out of it. So if you said it a little bit, if you give them too little information, they're going to make assumptions like, hey, I'm getting a new phone number. No, you're not. You're just getting like a thing to talk to other people in the office with, versus like, why do I care that I'm getting this? Oh, well, now you can connect to people and have conversations from your computer, from your cell phone, from the beach. Everyone likes to go to the beach, right, guys? Like, so you're giving them a value, but you're not getting into what voice over IP technology is and how all that stuff. Like, there's that balance of detail versus value, right?
Yeah, or like, you're given. Well, no, that's definitely along the lines of what we're talking about here. And I think another example would be like if I'm telling someone where to store specific kinds of information, right? I don't want to just be like, hey, this is where you store secure information, right? I want to be like, this is where you store this kind of secure information for this purpose, right? And this other kind of information should not go in that location, and here's why. Because if you leave it like, hey, put all of this kind of information in here, and if you don't, it's going to break our rules. Well,
who cares?
Okay, yeah, and what other information might I be able to put in there, right? Do I put all of that kind of information in there, or is there another location for that? Or do I have to ask somebody first? There's a lot of those kinds of questions. And, the users that don't care about stuff will just like do what they think is okay to do with that. And
Sure.
the users that do care about that, guess what they're going to do? They're going to inundate you with questions. They're going to be like, oh, wait a minute. But wait, how do I do this? And does this kind of information apply to it, right? So, yeah.
So one thing I was doing some research to try and make this a little bit more formal rather than just two guys riffing. And some of the common principles of communications that I came across are clarity of message, and making sure you're clear with the vocabulary that you use versus what they use. So if I say communications, I mean this. If I say telephony is a silly one. I can't think of a good example. If I say governance, this is what I mean by governance. If I say administration, this is what I mean. In fact, I was reading a contract this morning, and the section, one of the early sections in the documents before you get lost in all the legal stuff, is session means this. Like, it's such a simple word, the word session, but there's a definition of a session as it related to this particular contract and this event. So vocabulary, the value and what's in it for me, all part of clarity of message. If you're trying to help someone understand value and you spend 20 minutes talking about a bunch of BS, like, they're not paying attention anymore. In fact, we may have lost 3 of you because we've just been going on for so long. And that balance of giving them the right amount of detail versus pointing a fire hose at them and expecting them to read 30-page documentation to understand value. That's not how that works.
Right.
Another big principle is, giving someone information is one thing, but having a feedback loop, the episode on feedback, having a feedback loop where they can respond to that information and tell you if it was right or not, tell you what things they're not understanding, tell you what's working and what's not working. That's a huge part of it. And then you want to be timely. Like, if you're going to roll a product out 6 months from now, like, yeah, you might start sprinkling hints of information here and there. But if you send out the big announcement and then nothing for 5 months, not only are they going to forget what's happening, when you come back to it, they're going to be like, wait, this is too much happening in too short a time. I don't have time for this. Like, you've got to be very timely and consistent in those messages over a period of the right amount of time for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, you know, the structure of that communication is also really important too, right? People need to be able to know where to find the things and where which kind of information exists, because you may have a layered amount of communication, right? There may be like, you may have some room to have this kind of end user content that's a summary that explains things and passes on value, but there may be a requirement in your organization to have that more detailed documentation, or there may be users that require that too. So it's again, all of this stuff. And again, the reason that we call this Buzzkill is it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort to maintain. It's a lot of effort to build out, and we understand that. But it's also saving you, and I would say this is true for almost everything that we talk about on this podcast. It's kind of like there's like a cartoon of the guys that are pushing the cart with the square wheels, you know?
Yeah.
And they can't make it move, and the other person is saying, hey, you can try this round one, and they're like, we don't have time for that, right?
Yeah.
It's the exact kind of thing. The questions that you will avoid by doing this effectively, the amount of time filing tickets and cleaning up after people and solving errors that happen, will be drastically reduced by having this soft skill information well structured and deployed in your organization when you roll it out. If your communication is solid, if people understand what's in it for them, if they know what to do and when to do it, you're not going to be answering those questions. You're not going to be like, when you go in and do an audit, you're not going to be like, what's happening here, you know? And you can roll in the policies for governance and security on top and layer it in with this information if you do it effectively, right? Another reason to talk to a marketing person, to like have your communications requirements there, have them roll it in a way that's clear and concise and also delivers value and understanding to your end users. But then, of course, you know, if you need to have that more layered technical information behind it, then yeah.
I mean, I think that tells the story, right? You've got to be clear in your message, but balance the right amount of detail to make sure you're giving them value. You've got to give it over time. You've got to have an opportunity for them to give you feedback, and ultimately, this goes back to the phrase that we say every episode. You got to plan. You can't just roll out technology and expect it to work. The definition of success, and I'm going to get convinced Hunter to do an episode on this one week. The definition of success is no longer, I have deployed my software.
Right.
The definition of success is the use of that technology to accomplish the mission, whether it's a government agency, a defense agency, a commercial entity, healthcare organization. You have a mission, you have a job you are trying to accomplish. And if the technology isn't helping, then you did not successfully deploy your technology. So
that is accurate. That is accurate. I would say that for me personally, I think that one of the best IT experiences I had came from like on the job training when I took a job in a call center. They were using Oracle PeopleSoft to manage their information and case management, right? And we had a step-by-step process where we learned everything that we needed to do for our job in a classroom. And it was like 6 weeks of like, here's the scenario, use the tool to do it. Here's the scenario, use the tool to do it. And you may not be able to like pull workers out of productivity to have that, but hands-on training like that explains the context, the why, and get them to understand, you know, how something benefits them in their job when they're using the tool.
Right.
I guess another thing to touch on too is the deployment timeline of it, right? As Jay said, you know, success has a new definition, but it also is not only measured once.
Yes.
Right. And as we've touched on in all these episodes, training and deployment is not something, again, it's not this like, hey, here comes the solution, and then you do a few messages behind it, and then it's done. Any program that works like that is only going to be successful for the first couple of weeks that it's deployed and people are, front of mind with it. It's got to be this continual thing. There's got to be continued ongoing training that people expect. It needs to be part of their job expectation that they stay up to date with these things, and they need to understand coming in that this is how the company works, because you've got to make it part of your company culture in order for it to be successful.
Well, a really good example of what we're talking about there is look at Microsoft Teams. 3 years ago, Microsoft was touting the number of licenses they had deployed for Teams. How many people had gotten Teams turned on? 2 years ago, we started talking about, okay, the 6-month number of usage of Teams is starting to look at this. Last year, we started talking about monthly active users, especially 6-8 months ago when the pandemic hit. Microsoft and Zoom were arguing over the definition of active users, and that's really where monthly active users became a well-known phrase. The number of people who on a monthly basis averaged access to this tool. Now we're starting to talk about, how many minutes of people are people in meetings. Not only has the definition of success changed at least 4 times in that 3-year period, but they're starting to realize that, hey, just deploying it wasn't enough. Just turning seats on wasn't enough. And it's not like, don't get me wrong, this isn't about Microsoft making money. Yeah, that is for them. This is about companies who spent money on the collaboration platform, on Office 365, and they were spending money on licenses, but people weren't using it. Like, that's where that conversation is coming from. So, but I think we've dived deeper
we dove into it well.
Success more than I meant to.
But it's good. I think it's important.
Yeah. But the reason for that, really, relation to communications, if you're not communicating why we want you to use this, then people aren't going to understand. This goes back to perfect example. And then I think I'm done after this. I'll leave it up to you to wrap. The perfect example is I went into a pilot meeting. I think I've talked about this before. I went into a meeting with a customer who had been running a pilot for about 2 or 3 months of Microsoft Teams. And in the room was cybersecurity, the developers, the SharePoint team, the Exchange team, management, and a handful of end users, pilot users. And about an hour into it, the pilot users just had this glazed look on their face. And I stopped and I said, well, let's take a break. How are things working for you guys? And they're like, oh, well, we logged in and it seemed neat, but yeah, we aren't using it. I'm like, what do you mean you're not using it? And they're like, well, we were told this was a pilot, and our assumption is that, if it doesn't work, it's going to go away. So we tested it and we provided some basic feedback, but then we stopped using it. And I looked at the admins running the pilot and they're like, well, that's not going to work. Like, no, this isn't going away. You're a pilot as in a first release, not a pilot as in, are we going to use this? And I'm like, all right, right there. Vocabulary was not clear. Communications, this has been going on for 3 months and they only looked at it for 2 weeks. And at no point did they communicate back to you that they weren't using it. There's your feedback loop. And at no point did you communicate to them that this was permanent. There's a clarity of communication. The consistency of messaging. Like, if you're hitting them up once a week during a pilot and they've stopped using it, there's something, there's an inconsistency there. Yep. So that's I think that's part of that communication story is really making sure, like, it ain't like it was 20 years ago.
Yep. I totally agree.
Get off my lawn, you whippersnappers.
I think that this is funny as we're diving into this conversation. I think there's a lot of things that we point back to like 20 years ago, and it's kind of like when you have governance rules or classification rules or like audit rules, but like they don't actually support your systems being secure or actually properly classified. You're checking the box for the rules. That's like back in the day, these were always problems.
Right.
right? These were always problems. It's just they didn't care about them 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, because it's like it just was viewed totally differently by everyone dealing with software tools. And this is.
But again, I would go a step further. Back 30 to 35 years ago, my dad was the expert in computer technology at his 30-person accounting firm. And he was an end user. He wasn't a technologist, but he knew he had a problem. He wanted to solve it. He brought in someone who knew technology and pushed. And 10 years later, the organization looked at things and said, we really don't have the money to have a business person running the technology. Go ahead and focus on the business and we'll focus on the technology. And you started to see that diversion of having people focused on the business problem integrated with the tech.
Yeah.
And I know my dad will listen to this and say that's not quite how it went, but the story still makes sense. Is you see that division of tech focus on tech.
That's not the truth. Well, the way I tell it, it works though.
And so really there's really that time period in the 90s or late 80s or 90s where we really started to push the tech and the business apart from each other and try and stream down the amount of expense on tech. And I think what we're seeing, again, I think I've said this, so now we are definitely simply talking about things in circular motion, is we're seeing a renaissance of understanding the business need and tying it to the business. And yeah.
All right, great. Well, this has been the Buzzkill episode on communication. Thank you very much, Jay Leese. My name's Hunter Willis. Really appreciate everybody stopping by and listening to us. Hope that you will leave any information that you have about this in the comments. If you've had a communication strategy that's worked, though, honestly, and you feel like you have good communication in, especially when it comes to deploying tools and training, right? But also just general messaging with your organization, and have received a lot of, you feel like you're doing that really well, please leave some information, comments, or share this article and, write out a post about the strategy that you took to do that. And if you think that this isn't that important or you disagree with us about any of the points that we made today, also leave it in the comments there and let us know.
Yeah, we'd love to have a follow-up this with somebody who knows what they're talking about and isn't just talking out their imagination.
Yeah. So I mean, we've had some experience with this.
No,
but,
we've had experience.
That's true.
It's true.
Yeah, it would be good to get somebody that's actively dealing with a problem like this.
What I would love to see is because we're both technologists from in this perspective, we're coming from a technology perspective, and I've always said I'm good at combining the tech and the business, but that's a natural skill more than a professional training type thing. I would love to get somebody to come in and talk about their experience bringing that change management process and communications alongside the technology and in recent times how they've convinced the powers that have the budget the importance of that, because that's really what Buzzkill here is about, is you need to convince people of the importance.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I totally agree. All right, well, thanks everybody
we should stop. Yeah.
For watching. Yeah, it's done. We're done. Thanks everybody for
stuck a fork in it.
For watching. Yeah. And check us out. We'll be on again in 2 weeks, and we'll see you then.